Good evening, everybody. We are here. It has been a really very trying time here in Louisville, but we are managing and we are glad to come back with Sankofa series. Um, Deontay can talk about where he's been at, but doing a lot of uplifting of our elders and what it means to bring Black liberation into the city, but also how we organize in that and how we keep it going in all aspects, right? And so that's a piece we wanted to make sure we lift up because of not only what's going on in Frankfurt, but also what is happening here in Louisville and what we're seeing as we progress around our demands for against police terrorism, but also these folks that are in charge of those spaces, whether we're talking about the influencers or also our elected officials. Um, so we are joined here by a Black Liberation elder, a once Green Party vice president candidate, and a an organizer that has maintained that space in organizing and in the principal way of Black liberation. And we're just so thankful to have him here today. Amaju Baraka. Oh, he got thrown off again. Okay. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for the emails, but I love it because it's actually giving us the information that we need to be having around these conversations. And when I hit the elder up, he was like, "Oh, you want to talk about neoliberalism?" And I'm just like, "I guess so, right?" Because it just keeps creeping its way in as a way to make a solution for what is going on. And a lot of that conversation was being had in our spaces after the insurrection. And what we're really looking at these so-called elected leaders and then this Democratic Party bullshit that continues to be like, it's okay because we're here. And I don't know, it reminds me of like the Roosevelt times and the Kennedy times of always naming what this new political space looks like with the Democrats at helm. And so I love the pieces that have been going out, and I'll share those links in the comments, y'all. We're always down to make sure we share the education, and we are going to get this curriculum up. Um, but wanted to like really set the space around like what that means locally, not just at the federal or international level, but also like statewide. We're in a super majority. And I know Deontay wants to make sure we're uplifting the point that um, when we're talking about the various parties, because one of our bills did have a piece in there where they wanted to take away the partisanship of the parties, but how we do that in a way that can support true independency. I'll be in the green room, and I'm gonna go ahead and let y'all have the space.
Thank you. Well, first, let me thank both of you for allowing me to share this space and to be part of this conversation. And let me say too, I think folks need to understand, need to know, if they don't already know, that the work that you all have been involved in there, in that part of the world, has had international ramifications. That basically people know what is happening in Louisville. They know what's happening in that state. They're aware of the contradictions, and more importantly, they're aware of your organizing activities. That's the time that we're in right now. That basically what Black people can be doing in one part of the U.S. can resonate and have impact literally around the world. And that's what we used to do at one point. The struggle that I'm a proud member of. We talk about the Black Liberation Movement. I'm a veteran of that movement. And it's interesting, identifying as a so-called veteran, because it's almost like you part of a struggle in a war and like the war is over. But now it continues. And I'm glad to still be here and to be a part of this. When Chairman Fred had all of us, and I was on the south side of Chicago at that time, say, "I am a revolutionary." You see, that meant a lifelong commitment. It meant that you didn't play with revolution. You didn't pretend to be a revolutionary one year and then go off and do some other kind of stuff and then come back into the movement at some other point. No, it meant that you are committed to this struggle until we win. So yeah, there are a number of us who've been here for quite some time, but I'm gonna tell you, we are so inspired by the work that all of you all have been involved in. Now, part of this struggle, part of this work is also connected to um, the struggle for understanding, the struggle for attempting to bring to the experience a framework of understanding informed by your best assessment of the conditions that you find yourself in, and the circumstances that you have to confront in dealing with our common enemies. And what that requires is we've got to also read and study. We've got to challenge one another. We've got to understand what all these terms mean and what they mean directly to our lives. So being a revolutionary is also being someone committed to lifelong study. So when we talk about things like all these terms, neoliberalism and all of that, well, what we're talking about is this, of course. We talk about neoliberalism. We're talking about a form of governing and a particular way in which the state and the government is a part of the state is organized and the kinds of policies that they are pushing economically. And what we saw in the 1970s was a period of counter-revolution. The part of what the state did in the 1970s was to try to squash, forever they thought, the Black liberation movement and the movement that the Black liberation movement was a part of, which was a global movement against this backward colonial capitalist system. And the way in which they attempted to squash that movement was, it was two aspects to it. One, of course, was a military one, in which they unleashed ferocious repression against our movement, where they literally assassinated our leaders, they infiltrated our organizations, they forced people out of the country, they forced people sometimes to give up, okay? And the second aspect of that was an ideological one in which they determined that, they were not going to allow another generation to emerge that emerged in the 1960s and the 1970s. And that process was a process in which they were committed to turning us into quote unquote Americans, to transform consciousness. Okay. Now, the 1970s was also a period in which they introduced this so-called neoliberalism as part of that counter-revolutionary process. And what that meant was, up until the mid-1970s, you had the government that was governed by what we refer to as Keynesianism, where these governments in the U.S. and in Western Europe, because they were in the business of super exploiting Black people and other people of color in the so-called global South, they were able to bribe the working class in the northern countries, in the U.S., in Western Europe, to use the state to transfer some resources to us. So we had a few programs, the wages were propped up somewhat. People were able in the 1950s and 60s, at least white folks, to live the American dream. Now we've had to, of course, fight to get a little piece of that pie, in the 1960s, but that was part of that process, okay? So by the 1970s, though, because of the upsurge of the revolution in the US and the revolutionary process globally, the ruling class decided they were fighting back. So they fought back on every level. And one of the levels they fought back on too was to squash and stop this welfare state, okay, to eliminate the government's ability to provide some support to the working class. You know, it was a gradual process in the US, but what they did, they began to impose that on societies in the global South, outside of the US, okay? Gradually, that process caught up in the US, where they were transferring the industrial base of the US from the US to these global South countries so they can take advantage of cheap labor. What that did here in the US was drive down wages in the US. It made it very difficult for you to demand a raise from your boss when the boss will say, okay, y'all want more money, but I tell you what, if you all want to force us to give you all more money, we're going to shut down this factory and move it to Mexico. So gave them that kind of leverage. That was the process of introducing in a real way in the 1980s beginning, so-called neoliberalism, where you were driving down wages, you reduced the social investment by the government to the people, where you began to privatize the state. All of those activities that the government was involved in, the state was involved in, they moved them to the private sector, where they made everything a commodity. So when we talk about neoliberalism, we're talking about capitalism in its rawest form. Okay, so that process of expanding the neoliberal state, of expanding neoliberal economic policies, that resulted now in 2021 over 40 years of stagnant wages. But basically, we have that in terms of what you can buy in terms of the minimum wage and all of that has been, and even above the minimum wage is almost nothing. So neoliberalism has been the governing philosophy of the state for the last 40 years, and the impact on Black people, African people, has been absolutely devastating. That's why we have astronomical unemployment rates among our youth. That's why we are stuck now in these dead end jobs where you can't progress, or jobs where you're working part time, jobs where the wages have been moved for decades. So this is where we are now. That basically all the best jobs have been taken. Now we have a labor force in which the majority of Black workers are now Black women. 53% of the Black labor force are Black women. And those workers have been funneled into certain kinds of jobs that are vulnerable jobs. Okay, so the ability of people to be able to earn decent living, to have dignity in their lives, that's all part of the neoliberal process, and that's why we say neoliberalism is an enemy of the people. And the champions of neoliberalism, the champions of these policies, are both parties, but primarily being pushed by the Democrats. So I just wanted to. This is what we talk about. We can demystify all of this. It boils down to we're talking about a neoliberal capitalist system governed by a neoliberal capitalist party, the Democrats and the Republicans. It is a commitment to capital being able to super exploit workers in this country and around the world. And we say that neoliberalism has to be recognized, neoliberal capitalism has to be recognized as the enemy.
Man, that's heavy. That's heavy right there. We the Sankofa series, Baraka. One of the things we want to do was to try to recognize the ways in which history kind of informs the present conditions that we are going through, especially as it pertains to uh, police violence and murder. And so your work, not only the past work, but even the specific work that you're doing now, is so fundamental to our understanding of what we need to do in order to progress and to overcome. And as you said, here in Louisville, people are paying attention to us now. more than ever. And so it's an opportunity for us to get it right and to do some things. So I'm, like I said, looking forward to this conversation. I have 1,000,000,001 questions, or things I would like to pick your brain on. But I will ask you this and kind of just open it up to you to speak on it however you wish. What do you see as the kind of fundamental differences between organizing, as it were, let's say back in the 50s and 60s, and how it's changed now?
Well, one major change is the technology.
Yeah.
That there are some tremendous tools that organizers can use to link up with people and to impart information. That's fantastic. It allows us to not only disseminate information even more effectively, but allows us to be in contact with organizers like ourselves who have common interests with us, literally around the world. So the possibilities for real solidarity work among organizers is never been better. The drawback, though, my brother, is this: as all organizers should know, organizing is still a human to human proposition. You've got to be able to still talk to people. You got to get people into small rooms and where y'all can struggle through the issues, where y'all can struggle through your understanding of things that y'all are up against, and talk about the future. You got to follow up with people, because everybody's living life. They got issues. So that human component is still how you consolidate organization. You see, one of the things about organizing and building movement is that some of the most important time isn't really when you're out there in the mobilization and the excitement of the confrontation or whatever. It's in between those times, where you are building the organizational structure, where you are building the processes that would make sure that your organization is sustainable. Okay, so the science of organization hasn't changed much in terms of it being the science of human relations. I've trained many organizers, and I've always reminded people that an organizer, the skills we talk about for what an organizer must have, is 20% technical skills, if you will, how to run a meeting and all that kind of good stuff, and 80% people skills. You've got to be able to impart information in ways that people understand. You got to love the people, because it takes a tremendous amount of patience to be an organizer. If you
You preach to the choir.
Yeah, if you're looking for people who are just agree with you, and you don't, and you get frustrated because they won't see the world the way you think that they should see the world, you might want to reconsider the kind of work that you're doing. Okay, because when you love the people and you understand, the complexities of the people that we are trying to organize, and you understand the kinds of conditions that are created by the enemy to confuse people, to have us struggling among ourselves, to have us distracted by things that are irrelevant. And then you understand you've got to have patience, that the terrain of winning people to struggle, winning over consciousness, is where we are at, and that's a very sometimes non-glamorous but necessary part of this process of organizing.
Man, it's like we have us having this conversation with some cats I worked with earlier, man, and just about that, a trauma associated with organizing, the trauma that it almost takes to even want to be an organizer. A lot of people don't even talk about that. Most of the time, people who are organized, it's because they felt something that's been kind of messed up to them, and they want to do something about it. And so when those groups of people collect themselves and try to fix some problems, sometimes we forget that we also have some problems that we need to at least set on the table. So I appreciate you, at least if I have the understanding of the correct understanding of what you were saying. And this will be the last thing that I'll ask for now at least, and that's your experience in academia. Um, I'm currently teaching at Spalding University, and I teach a course called Policing the Black Experience. Pretty unique situation for me. We don't have an African American Studies major, but we do have a minor, and I'm pretty much kind of in charge of that. Most of the classes are mine, and which is a good thing for at least for now. But I just wanted to hear your take and just have the people that are listening to hear your take about the responsibilities of academia and how we can further integrate ourselves in the community and get our hands dirty with some of this work.
Mm. Well, I appreciate that question. And as you know from a little bit about my background, that's one of the pieces of my life that I was involved in at certain points. Very, very important area of work. And it's important. I'm glad to see that, even though that from the point of view of the university, they give you they give you that little piece that you could construct those classes. They like, we make them happy. But see,
Right.
That's where the subversion comes in, because it gives you the opportunity to construct those classes in order to build consciousness. And you can direct some of the students who are the most serious ones, who are looking to serve our people, and direct them right to struggle. So this is one of those areas of contestation where we contest for our people, and even non-Africans, because a lot of people trying to understand and win some consciousness. So if they come into your classes, of what I know they do, everybody gets a chance to be exposed to some consciousness. Okay. So yes, this area is important. Now, there's a whole lot of confusion too, because of a whole lot of stuff that's come out of academia that's only helped to confuse people who are trying to engage in struggle, trying to make revolution. I'm not going to censor myself, okay? So and so we've got to deal with that. Folks who are coming out of academia and trying to go into the movement have to understand their role. Their role is to help to systematize knowledge, to support struggle. It ain't to run stuff necessarily, okay?
Yeah.
And so you got to be careful. Folks got to be careful about that. And as you work with other folks, in that field who want to, get involved, they got to be educated also to understand that, we can't come in and think we're going to take over and run things. We can't, we've got to be mindful of space, okay? And if we're not prepared to support and to subordinate ego, then we might want to rethink, trying to pretend to be a revolutionary. Because this is, like I said, this ain't no game. So yeah, that process is very important. Bringing people into the process is important. But again, as long as people understand their role and their responsibility, and
I was thinking the same thing. And it's important too, because everybody's role is not going to be the same. And as an observer, at least in a researcher, one of the things I recognize is that for me, I've been trained to do some of all of it. I've been trained in protest, organizing, research, but now I don't have to protest. I leave that to people who are a little bit younger and can run a little bit faster from the police. I don't stand on the front lines anymore. But one of the things is that I do find important, and just to echo what you said, I find a lot of value in people understanding what their actual role is, what their talents are, and also everybody within the movement recognizing when you have someone that's talented or able in a certain capacity, and to be able to use that to the best of our abilities in the movement. So I'm gonna hush up for now, but I want to see if you want to leave us with some parting knowledge before Sister Chanel comes on and gets us back together.
Well, I mean, the party knowledge is that basically, we keep on moving, we keep on struggling. And in the process of struggle, in the process of practice, that's how we learn. So these kinds of conversations are very, very important. But, the practice also is important. But putting those two things together is really the role and responsibility that we have. So I salute again folks that are involved in this struggle. But again, I'm suggesting very strongly that part of this process means continued struggle. And we're going to talk about, linking up this local to the international, and why all of that is important, because what is being impacted there in Louisville is not just particular to Louisville. It's particular to the nation and to the globe, because we are part of a global system. Okay, we need to talk about what that really means and what that means in terms of allies and potential allies out there.
I appreciate that. Sister Janelle, what you got for us?
Exactly. And I'm so glad that that was lifted up, because it seems like every corner we turn, white supremacy wants to bring us another space to be reactionary in. And I love that the elder lifted up what the practice is. When we make sure we practice within our principles, no crisis can detour us away from what we know the struggle is about. And in that, knowing what the struggle is about is staying true to where we are, but where we gotta go. So I love that you mentioned Afrofuturism too in that scope, because a lot of folks are being very reactionary, and that's fine. They're new. I mean, we've had a hell of a year. We're in a pandemic. We had a global uprising, but that global uprising, I think, for a lot of folks needs to know, was centered around the global South. So when we talk about the global South, y'all, we're talking about folks around the equator and in southern nations, African nations, Southeast Asian nations. We're talking about Black folks around the globe, and who had been in these streets before June and who are still in these streets now, right? And so we have strong condolences to the folks that were murdered in Atlanta of Asian descent, and what has happened to them, because we know white supremacy. This isn't a time to get nuanced about like who did what when we know who it is. It isn't a time to argue back and forth whether or not he meant it or whatever he said he did or whatnot, because we know what system is going to adjudicate him. We've been very clear since January 6th what system actually exists for post June 2020 folks. And here we are, and it is disseminated for us. There are two different systems in this country, one that adjudicates non white people, and one that adjudicates white people. And so we are seeing that system work for him again. Asians in the US have been hunted for a long time, and we're seeing that hunting still take place due to what Trump has called, I don't even know the terms because I don't like listening to him, and what he's done around this disease. And this is where this is coming from. We are not lost on what that looks like, and neither are our Asian brothers and sisters. So we want to send condolences out to them. But I think this is a very much important time to talk about what that is looking like, especially as Black Alliance for Peace is lifting up what is happening with our Haitian brothers and sisters. And so I want to make sure you have room for that as well. And then we can make sure we bring it on into like what that looks like at the state level, because I want to talk so bad about like what our super majorities are doing in the historic southeast of the U.S.
Yeah, I like talking about Black political parties.
We've had them, and we've tried to develop them. I mean, one of the last ones was the National Black Independent Political Party in the late '70s and early '80s, and there are some Black parties today. The New African Independent Political Party, for example. So that's something to the people are looking at as a possibility also. And of course, you got the Ujima People's Party for Progress, for example. So there's a number of these formations that are developing because everybody is concerned with developing independent Black political power. And the only way you do that is when you have independent Black organizations. And if you're going to participate in the electoral process as part of your strategy for advancing our people, you've got to do it from an organized and independent base, many people argue. And so looking at some formations like that is important. But the difference today that I think we have to keep in mind is we've got to have clear, I think, radical politics that will ground that process. Because I believe that one of the mistakes that we made back in the 1970s was from when many of us decided that the electoral process was completely corrupted, that there was no space for us to advance any kind of progressive agenda, and that we were going to embrace, in essence, insurrectionary kind of a strategy. There was some political spaces that have been created out of our struggle on the local and state level. And when those vacuums were there politically, guess who were able to fill them? The black petty bourgeoisie. When we said we don't want to deal with electoral process, they were like, "We'll do it. I
Yeah.
run for mayor.
Yep.
I run
I
for
mean, hey,
city
they still
council."
doing
The
it too.
black suit and ties, y'all. Like, I don't think we talk enough about how they interrupt these moments and how they're doing that now.
Exactly. So that looking
Yeah.
at how we build political power, and what kind of formations we build is important. But having that analysis that says we're going to ground our politics in the majority of our people, and the majority of our people are workers. Okay, so you remind yourself of that we with the folks in the hoods, we with the working class. When that guides your politics, then that will help to avoid all these slicksters who are coming to your process and want to take things over and be pushing a line that basically is a line that only enhances the power of the black, what we call the black petty bourgeoisie or the middle class. Okay, so you got to have a different kind of politics, even though is all black.
Man. So we're gonna be back on this coming Wednesday, right? Week from today, same time.
Yes, absolutely. The same time. And then April, whatever that is after that, Deontay had another program going on during that. I want to lift that up as we leave here for folks to like set and make that too. So I was making a banner so I can make sure it pops up. We are looking at new worlds, new systems being built. When we have major uprisings, the same way we saw Ferguson, Baltimore, Chicago, and plenty of other places who made sure to revolt at the time that they did after the state not only has stolen Black people, but in this moment, in this global uprising, we watch the state take our jobs and our very health and our lives, that we are looking for something anew, not the same, not getting back to our normal, a normal that has put us here, neoliberalism. This is the message that we're leaving with today, and knowing that entering into mayoral races or the same old political spaces with the same old concepts are not going to make whatever happened in June profitable for right now, right? And then profitable for whom? And again, lifting up this piece. The majority of our people are workers. So what are you doing to make sure that they are always front and center? We don't need to keep saying, oh, we're helping people's voices get heard. People are yelling. People were out in the streets. People are still there. So where is the space for them? And if you're in the way, you got to move. Get rid of the keys to the gate and allow our folks to do what they need to do. Thank y'all for joining us today. We are so thankful for the elder. This just feels like really complete. I'm gonna take a nap. No, I'm just playing.
Man,
All right.
yeah, man.
um,
I appreciate you.
and then link up with us how you can get connected with the National Black Liberation Movement as we start moving a lot of pieces in solidarity. Black Alliance for Peace. We'll make sure that that's added to these links as well. Join a Black radical formation near you. This is not the time to be experimenting with electoral politics that are not being led by Black people. Join a Black radical liberation formation near you. Thank y'all and have a good night.
All right.
Thank you. So,
Thank y'all. Peace, man. See you next week.
okay.